Haribo. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Shila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Shila Prabhupada. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevalakati Satma. 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 Anumoi Savadana Mani. Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoiti. Prapti hoya hoiti. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya. Anakoriyo Mani Asha. Anakoriyo Asha Shri Guru Charane Rate Ese Uttamagati Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asha Ye Prasade Purisavasha Jakurana Diloje Jamne Jamne Prabhu se Jakurana Diloje Jamne Jamne Prabhu se Dive Gyan Revokashito Dive Gyan Revokashito Prema Bhakti Aite Avidya Vinasayate Prima Bhakti Aite Avidya Vinasayate Virigaya Harasharito Virigaya Harasharito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Aramachanara Bandhu Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Aramachanara Bandhu Prabhu Nachivana Lokena Lokera Shivana Ha ha Prabhu Karo Doyo Deo More Bajajaya Oh, Prabhu Karo Doya Deo More Badajaya Ebe Asha Kushukti Bhuvana Ebe Asha Kushukti Bhuvana Srila Prabhupada Patita Pavana Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaho. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dishatarine. Namaste Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hey. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hey! Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, hey! Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Hey, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hey guys, you are sleeping. Wake up. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hey, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jai Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jai Jai Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jai Jai Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Jai Radhe Shyam. Jai Jai Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Jai Radhe Shyam. Jai Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Jai Radhe Shyam. Jai Radhe Shyam. Nitai Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bo. Vaishnava Thakur ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paramaraja Kacharya Ashtata Sata Sisi Madhisti Mahingre Silave Charanaravinda Shila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaja Shila Prabhupada ki jai. Anand Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Shila Prabhupada ki jai. Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Prabhu Mata Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Yovadhan ki jai. Vrindavan Mathura Dham ki jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham ki jai. Ganga Maya Yamuna ki jai. Bhakti Devi Tulasi Devi ki jai. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanand. All glories to the Assembled. All glories to the Assembled. Assembled glories. All glories to Sri Guru and Shri Ganga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada. Shri Prabhupada.
ज्ञानाञ्जनाञ्जस्य ज्ञानञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुर्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरोन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपां साग्रजातं सहगना रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण चैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोस्तुते। तप्तकाञ्चन गौरङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वंशाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैता गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरा भक्तवृन्द। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. So good morning to everyone. Is this a little loud or it's okay? It's okay. So this morning we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, and we'll recite this verse together from the 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, text number 10. Bhavadvida Bhagavatas Tirtabhuta Svayam Vibho Tirti Kurvanti Tirthani Svantastena Gadabrita Bhavadvida Bhagavatas Tirtabhuta Svayam Vibho Tirti Kurvanti Tirthani Svantastena Gadabrita Bhavadvida Bhagavata Tirthabhuta Svayam Vibho Tirti Kurvanti Tirthani Svantastena Gadabrita. ladies. Bhagavad-gita Bhagavatas So we'll read the translation and purport. Just before we do, just to give you the context of where we are in the Bhagavatam. The battle of Kurukshetra has concluded. Everything has finished. Millions of soldiers have been annihilated. And now Yudhishthira has taken up the throne. Yudhishthira is in the palace, and out of Yudhishthira's great magnanimity, even though Dritarastra throughout his life did so many things, so many injustices, still, sorry, is it possible to just turn this down a little bit? This Gokul? We just turn this down a little bit, just because the feedback, I think, is a little high. Even though Dhritarashtra did so many things to, so many injustices, still Yudhishthira out of his magnanimity said, no, whatever has happened, you still come and stay with us. So Yudhishthira, Dhritarashtra, all the Pandavas, they are ruling. And Vidura, who before the battle of Kurukshetra had gone on pilgrimage because he was offended, and we'll talk about this later on. While he's on pilgrimage, he thinks, let me try one last time. Dhritarashtra's whole life did not listen to anyone. He received so much good instruction, but he did not transform his heart. Let me try and go back one last time and see whether I can ignite any change in him. So Vidura comes back, and as Vidura comes back, Yudhishthira is over the moon to see him. He's so happy. Yudhishthira welcomes him, and then Yudhishthira says this beautiful verse, welcoming back Vidura and glorifying Vidura. So translation. My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. Because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. And then we'll just read an excerpt from Srila Prabhupada's purport. The personality of Godhead is omnipresent by his diverse potencies everywhere. Just as the power of electricity is distributed everywhere within space. Similarly, the Lord's omnipresence is perceived and manifested by his unalloyed devotees like Vidura, just as electricity is manifested in an electric light bulb. A pure devotee like Vidura always feels the presence of the Lord everywhere. He sees everything in the potency of the Lord and the Lord in everything. The holy places all over the earth are meant for purifying the polluted consciousness of the human being by an atmosphere surcharged with the presence of the Lord's unalloyed devotees. If anyone visits a holy place, he must search out the pure devotees residing in such holy places, take lessons from them, try to apply such instructions in practical life, and thus gradually prepare oneself for the ultimate salvation, going back to Godhead. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. This is a very beautiful verse. If you see in this verse, there is a word that appears multiple times. Tirtha, Tirthi, and Tirthani. Yesterday we were talking about how our ultimate goal is to awaken prema, love for Krishna, and we know that the pastimes of love are enacted by Krishna with his associates in the divine world of Goloka Vrindavan, the spiritual world. The place where all dreams are reality, described in the Brahma Samhita, where every step is a dance, every word is a song, every act is an act of love, all trees fulfill desires, all water is nectar, every act is impelled by selfless love. That is the place that we're trying to reach, Prabhupada says, going back home, back to Godhead. However, in order to reach there, we need help. And one of the ways in which Krishna helps is he establishes tirthas. Tirtha is a very interesting word. The word tirtha literally means a bridge. Tirtha means a bridge, a crossing place, a gateway, a portal, an entrance into eternity. That's what a tirtha is. So we know that the most famous types of tirtha that we're familiar with is, for example, Bhoma Vrindavan. So we go to Vrindavan and we take shelter of Vrindavan, knowing Vrindavan to be a tirtha. In one sense, it's in the spiritual, it's in the material world. It's here, you take a flight there, and you have to get a visa, which is becoming increasingly difficult. In one sense, Vrindavan is in the material world, but we know it's a tirtha, it's a crossing place. So when you're in that land, it's almost as though you're in the material world, but you're already in eternity, because it's a crossing place, it's a juncture. So Vrindavan is known as a tirtha. This is known as the earthly tirtha. But there's another type of tirtha, the tirtha which is known as an envisioned tirtha. A pure devotee can manifest the holy dham wherever they go. And therefore, yes, we go to Vrindavan, but by Srila Prabhupada's vision, he created new Vrindavan. He created new Mayapur. He created new Jagannath Puri. He created new Panihati Dham. All of these places are also tirthas, because they are also a crossing place to the spiritual world. So there's the earthly tirtha, there's an envisioned tirtha, but then there's also an individual tirtha. A devotee also himself or herself becomes a place of pilgrimage because they carry Krishna within their heart. And therefore, wherever they go, they make that place into a place of pilgrimage. So Yudhishthira is glorifying Vidura. He's saying that if one actually wants to contact the spiritual reality, then just by being in your presence, so much opportunity is there, because you are the bridge which is connecting us to the eternal spiritual reality. So what we'll do today is we'll look at Vidura and why he's such a great personality. We often think of Vidura as an amazing personality because he had amazing political wisdom, he had amazing practical wisdom, he had amazing spiritual wisdom. But Vidura wasn't just someone who was extremely learned, Vidura was also someone who had incredible devotion. Even when Krishna wanted to come to Dritarastra one final time to convince him to give up his stubbornness and just give the kingdom, then Krishna came as a peace messenger to Hastinapur. And Krishna could have stayed anywhere. But where did Krishna decide to stay? At the home of Vidura. And we know the famous story that Vidura's wife was so overcome with excitement that Krishna is coming that she began to offer bananas. But she threw away the banana and gave Krishna the peels. And in this way, Krishna accepted it because Bhavagrahi Janardana, he accepted the love. This is the love. So Vidura is an incredible personality. And today we're going to look a little bit at Vidura and Dritarastra, and we're going to compare them. Because yesterday His Holiness Sacinandana Maharaj gave us an incredible principle. Does anyone remember the Sanskrit principle that Maharaj gave us yesterday? Louder? Pratipaksha bhavana, the opposite way of thinking. And Maharaj beautifully explained this principle, and somehow by Krishna's arrangement this topic fits in perfectly with this principle, because today we will look at how Vidura and Dritarastra had the complete opposite ways of looking at life. They had complete different visions. When we will look at Vidura and Dritarastra, maybe we will see some of Vidura in ourselves, and maybe we will see a lot of Dritarastra in ourselves, maybe. We'll see. Each of us have a vision, you see. Each of us have a darshan in this life. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Like two kids had an alcoholic father. Yesterday Maharaj was talking about parents and upbringing. So here were two children who had an alcoholic father. One of them grew up to be an alcoholic himself, and the other one grew up to not touch one drop of liquor. So they went to the son who became an alcoholic and they said, "Why did you become an alcoholic?" He said, "My whole childhood I watched my father who was an alcoholic." They went to the other son who never touched one drop of liquor and they said, "Why did you abstain your whole life?" He said, "My whole childhood I grew up watching my father who was an alcoholic." That was very interesting. Because two people can see the same things, but according to their darshan. You see, darshan doesn't just mean what you see with your eyes. Darshan means how you then compute that vision according to what's going on in your heart. Each one of us has a disposition, a consciousness within our heart, and then we see something with our eyes, but according to the disposition within us, the inner darshan that we have, we see complete different things. What is the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita called? Shainya Darshan, observing the armies. And Arjuna is observing the armies in the first chapter of the Gita, and what is he telling Krishna? Vepatuscha sharire me roma harshascha jayate gandivam shramshate hastat tvakcheva paridayate. Arjuna is seeing all the armies at the beginning. This is his darshan, and what is happening? My body is shaking. My skin is burning. The bow, Gandiva, is slipping from my hand. This bow is slipping from Arjuna's hand. You know, Arjuna had made a vow. If anyone ever tells me to put the Gandiva bow down, I'll kill them. That's how determined he was as a Kshatriya to hold on to his Gandiva bow. But even Arjuna says the bow is slipping. My mind is reeling. This is Arjuna's darshan, Shainya darshan in chapter 1. But then 45 minutes later, once Krishna has given him all these instructions, Arjuna is seeing the same battlefield. But what does he say? Nastamoha smrite labdva tvat prasadat mayachyuta stitosmi gatasandeha karishe vachanam tava. He says, Krishna, my illusion is gone, my fear is gone, my inhibitions have disappeared, I've regained my memory, all my doubts have been annihilated, and I'm ready to fight. That's how vision can change. So darshan, each one of us have a darshan. And what is our darshan made up of? Our darshan is basically made up of two primary things. But there's a third thing that most of the people in the world don't know about that can transform your vision. The first thing that our darshan or our vision of this world is made up of is our condition. We each enter into this world with a history of experiences from previous lives, and therefore we each have a nature. isn't it? I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to do a past life regression. I tried 11 times, I never managed to do it. There are devotees who do past life regressions to find out who they were in their previous life. Whether it's imagination or whether it's something substantial, we'll leave you to decide. Most devotees end up being like, they always find out they were like a king in the previous life or something. This always seems to be a common theme. But then they're able to link previous lives and certain disposition they have now. Once I was in a university and we were doing a past life regression program. The ways we used to attract people, quite interesting. But anyway, she started crying, the devotee took her back, and then she was an African child on a ship, and she was a slave. And she said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because I'm the slave driver, he is threatening me with a sword, and he is threatening to throw me overboard into the ocean." And then he asked her, "Do you have a fear of water?" She said, I can't go near the water in this life. I'm so scared, like I've never been able to go near a swimming pool." So maybe something from a previous life. So we're carrying so many conditions and nature from a previous life. This makes up our vision. But not just that, in this life we're having interaction with so many people, with so many places, with so many experiences. Most people, for example, if they come to the Hare Krishna movement and they're not able to trust, have you ever met someone who comes to the movement and finds it hard to trust others? It could well be to do something with their childhood, because they were exposed to some perhaps authorities who they could not fully, who did not fully protect them. And therefore they find it very difficult to trust. And so our vision in this life is primarily made up of condition, which is nature, and interaction, which is nurture. Even modern psychology says this. But in Krishna consciousness, we understand there's one other major thing that's present which can help us to change our vision. We may have a condition from previous life, we may have an interaction in this life which makes us in a certain way, but by connection to spiritual wisdom, by connection to spiritual practices, by connection to spiritual people, we can actually transform our vision. And even though we may have a certain nature and a nurture, we can actually transform ourselves. So this, if you think about this, this is actually incredibly powerful concept. This is why Srila Prabhupada said that his books, what he was giving in his books, he said, this is actually the greatest gift that I'm giving to the world. Because this connection with spiritual wisdom is what can transform the way you look at life. We often think, I am who I am, I just look at life the way I look at life. But through Shastra Chakshush, by seeing through the eyes of scripture, one can actually change their vision. And so what we're seeing is that Vidura and Dritarastra have a completely different vision, because they have a different condition, they have a different interaction, but most importantly, they have a different connection. Vidura has connection. At the moment, Dritarastra doesn't have connection. And therefore, they're seeing the same things, they're going through the same things, but they're experiencing something completely different. They have an opposite way of thinking. Because we have limited time today, what I'm going to show you is just 3 major areas in which Vidura and Dritarastra see things completely differently. And maybe these are things which you can perhaps relate to. These are just 3 comparisons amongst many. There could be 10, 20, 30. It's a fascinating subject to look at their comparison, but I'll just give you 3 today. If you know the history of the Mahabharata, I'm sure you know, then we know that Vichitra Virya, he died. before having any children. So he had his wives, Ambika and Ambalika. But there was no one to impregnate them because Bhishma had taken Deva Vrata, a great vow that I will never have any contact with the opposite gender. And so there was a dilemma, what to do. Then they decided Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva is the answer. Vyasadeva, by his divine vision, will impregnate them. And so first Vyasadeva came to Ambika. Vyasadeva was a renunciate, an ascetic, a severe, doing severe penance. And so when Ambika saw him, the sight of this sage was so alarming that she closed her eyes. And we know that Vyasadeva then impregnated her, and the son was born blind, Dritarastra. Then Ambalika was sent forward. And Ambalika, she knew, I better not close my eyes. That's not going to be a good idea. But still, the sight of Vyasadeva was so alarming, was so nerve-wracking for her that she was shaking. Shaking, nervous wreck. And therefore, she had a son, and her son was Pandu, someone who had sight, hearing, speech, but whose body was very, very weak. And then they said, okay, one last time. And Ambika and Ambalika didn't volunteer themselves. They said, once is enough. So they sent the maidservant, who was very wise, who was very spiritually in tune, and therefore she knew, is Vyasadeva, he may look a certain way, but he's an ascetic, he's a great divine spiritual personality, what to be scared of? No? So she had no issue. And her son was Vidura, someone who was born with perfect faculties in all respects. So they all grew up together. Now the first difference we see between Dritarastra and Vidura is that Dritarastra throughout his life was always in victim mentality. He was always thinking, I'm a victim. I was born blind. And because I've been born blind, my whole life has been spoiled. All my opportunities have been taken away. My potential for success, my potential for achieving what I want to achieve in this world has been annihilated. I'm so unfortunate. I'm a victim. Dhritarashtra was constantly in victim mentality because he wasn't seeing what had come to him, but he was always seeing what he was deprived of. Dhritarashtra could have seen that I'm born blind, but I'm in a royal family with such amazing personalities. But rather his vision was, I'm born in a royal family with amazing personalities, but I'm blind. You see, it's a difference. They're seeing both things, but where are they putting the emphasis? Each of us, we see both sides, but where do we put the emphasis? That depends on our darshan. Vidura, on the other hand, was always grateful. He could have also been in victim mentality. I have all the faculties, I have all the knowledge, I have factually everything needed to be a ruler. But just because I was born the son of a maidservant, I've been deprived of the opportunity. He could have also thought like that, but he never thought like that. He appreciated, he was grateful, he accepted his situation. And in this way, you see that their lives were of a completely different quality, because what were they focusing on? Dhritarashtra was a victim, whereas Vidura was always grateful. In the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, there's a beautiful verse by the Avanti Brahmana, and he says something incredible. He reflects back on his own life, and he sees that there was so much suffering in his life. But what is his conclusion? Nayam jano me sukhadu kahetur nadeva tatma griha karma kalaha mana param karamana mananti samsara chakram parivartayadyat. He said, I looked back in my whole life and I saw that there was so much suffering. Nayam jano me sukhaduka hetur. I used to think that my suffering was caused by other people. I was wrong. Na devatatma. Later on, I used to think that maybe my suffering is caused by the gods. I was wrong. Graha. Later on, I used to think that my suffering was caused by the planets. Prabhu, I've done my astrology. Doesn't look good. I was wrong. Kala. Later on, I used to think that suffering is just something that comes with time. It's inevitable and everyone there. I was wrong. Karma. Later on, I thought that maybe my own karma is the cause of my suffering. That sounds right. I was wrong. He says, none of these things were the cause of my suffering. So what was the cause of my suffering? Mana param karanam amananti. The param karanam, the main cause, the ultimate cause, the supreme cause of all my suffering. Manam is my own mind. We say that there are three types of suffering in this world: adhyatmika, adhidevika, adhibautika. But practically we can say there's only one type of suffering. The suffering that's caused by the mind. Because if you've conquered the mind, jitatmana prasantasya paramatma samahita. One who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached. There's no suffering. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And so Dritarastra and Vidura had a completely different way of thinking. Dhritarashtra's way of thinking was a victim mentality, whereas Vidura was always grateful. They grew up like this. Dhritarashtra, so many times, he was making mistakes because of his attachment to Duryodhana. In the youth, so many intrigues to try and kill the Pandavas. Finally, they sent the Pandavas to a house of lac to set them on fire, burn them alive. Dhritarashtra was compliant. He didn't stop it. Later on, the Pandavas had to go into hiding. And then finally, when they came back, Dritarastra faked it. Oh, you're alive. That's such a great thing. In his mind, he was thinking, oh, I thought the Pandavas were gone. And now my sons can be the rulers. Dritarastra said, yes, I will give you a kingdom. And what does he give them? Khandava Prashta, the barren land. Basically the worst piece of kingdom you could give someone. Pandavas accepted it, no problem. And what did they do? They made Khandava Prastha into Indraprastha. Rajasuya sacrifice. They were flourishing. Dhritarashtra again, teething with envy. And then later on, by the schemes of Shakuni and Duryodhana, they came to Dhritarashtra. They said, we'll organize a gambling match. Dhritarashtra said, no, from gambling all dissension comes. No, it's a good idea, we should do it. They convinced him. And then he organized the gambling match. And then that whole situation went on. Pandavas were exiled. Pandavas went away 13 years. Finally they returned. When they returned, still Dhritarashtra was not willing to give the kingdom back. Krishna said, I will go as a messenger myself, as a peace messenger, as a Shanti Duta, a messenger of peace, to try to convince Dhritarashtra. Krishna even shows Dhritarashtra his universal form. I mean, talk about illumination. I mean, that is really illuminating someone. But again, Dhritarashtra just doesn't get it. And then Vidura says, let me try. So then Vidura comes. And Vidura now speaks in a more heavy way. And he's trying to, before the battle is about to start, before this battle is going to happen, Vidura is saying, there's one last chance. Give it back. Give back the land. Give back the kingdom. And then Duryodhana comes with the sharp words. And Duryodhana says, you've always been against us. You've always been on the side of the Pandavas. You've always given counsel which was for their benefit and which was never for our benefit. You are just the son of a maidservant, the kept son of a maidservant. You have no position even to be in this palace. And Duryodhana speaks so heavily, and at that moment Vidura realizes, this is Krishna's sign, I have to leave. Vidura puts his bow by the door of the palace, and Vidura just leaves. And when Vidura is leaving, there's no bitterness, there's no anger, there's no resentment, there's no sense that I gave so much here, they didn't appreciate it, and now I have to leave. He just sees that clearly this is Krishna's plan for me to go on to bigger and better things, and he walks away, completely flexible according to Krishna's plan. Herein we find another contrast between Vidura and Dhritarashtra. Vidura is completely flexible and completely fearless, seeing Krishna's plans. But Dritarastra, on the other hand, is completely fixed and is completely fearful. He's not able to let go of his own plans. What does the name Dritarastra even mean? Rashtra means a land, and Drita means to hold on. Dritarastra literally means one who is holding on to the land. But it doesn't just mean one who's holding on to the land, it means one who's holding on to their plans. They say if you want to make Krishna laugh, tell him your plans. Because we have our plan and Krishna has his plan. Are we willing, flexible, fearless, fully available to move with Krishna's plan? Vidura was, Dhritarashtra wasn't. It's interesting, the word Vraja, we know Vraja means Vrindavan. Vraja also means to move. So why are the residents of Vrindavan known as Vrajabasis? Because they're always moving with Krishna's plan. They're flexible, fearless when it comes to Krishna's plan. So here we find another completely opposite way of thinking between Dhritarashtra and Vidura. Dhritarashtra is completely fixed in his mindset and fearful, therefore, whereas Vidura is completely flexible, whatever Krishna. Prabhupada was always so flexible. One thing wasn't working out, he just tried something else and then something else. Later on, Prabhupada said, I didn't realize but all along how Krishna was planning something amazing. We have to live life going forwards, but sometimes we can only understand life looking backwards. So the devotee is always flexible, moving with Krishna's plan. So like this, Vidura went on pilgrimage, and he went to many, many holy places. He spoke to Uddhava on that journey, he spoke to Maitreya on that journey, and all these conversations are recorded in the Bhagavatam, 3rd canto. Then he heard that the battle of Kurukshetra was over. The battle of Kurukshetra had concluded. Millions of individuals had died. The Pandavas were now ruling, but then he heard one thing. He heard Dritarashtra is still there and he's in the palace. And Vidura, even though he had been ignored by Dritarashtra his whole life, Vidura, even though he had been insulted by Dritarashtra and Duryodhana his whole life, even though he had been completely disregarded by both of them, when Vidura heard that, what did he think in his mind? Let me go back. Let me go back one last time and see if I can help Dritarashtra. Just see the level of friendship and the level of forgiveness that Vidura has. One of the hardest things in this world is to forgive someone else. In the greatest Vaishnavas in the Bhagavatam, we find that their level of forgiveness is incredible. Devaki and Vasudeva are ready to forgive Kamsa despite all of his atrocities. Parikshit is ready to forgive. All these Vaishnavas just ready to forgive, even though so many injustices. Ambarish ready to just forgive Durvasa Muni, even though Durvasa tried to kill him. And Vidura just ready to forgive. We often share this with devotees, that the goal of life is not to remember every terrible thing that someone did against you. The goal of life is to remember all the beautiful things that Krishna is doing for you every single day. But the problem is, if our mind is hijacked with all the terrible thoughts of ways in which we've been the object of injustice in this life, there will be no more space to remember the beautiful things that Krishna has done for us. Therefore, Vidura represents complete forgiveness, whereas Dhritarashtra represents someone who holds grudges. Vidura represents someone who has friendship and affection, so much so that he's willing to go back. Dhritarashtra represents someone who also has friendship, but he doesn't have affection, he has attachment. You see, Vidura was a friend in affection to Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was a friend in attachment to Duryodhana. There's a difference. There's a difference between friendship which is based on affection and friendship which is based on attachment. In friendship which is based on attachment, you want to please that person, but you don't want to also do the difficult things necessary to help that person improve. Friendship based on affection is, I love this person deeply, and if that sometimes means that we have to say something difficult, so be it. So can you now see how there's a completely different mentality, a completely opposite way of thinking, a completely different darshan? And this is what is determining their experience of life. Now the amazing thing is that even though Dhritarashtra lived his whole life in this mentality, what we're going to hear about next is how Vidura comes at the last moment, at the nth hour, and basically changes the vision of Dhritarashtra. That's amazing. Because we may think, I've been in the Krishna consciousness movement 10 years, I've always been like this, I'm going to be like this. Vidura comes in, and Vidura, somehow or other, is basically able to change Dhritarashtra's vision, because what does he do? He gives Dhritarashtra connection to spiritual wisdom. And because he gives him that connection, Dhritarashtra begins to look at things very differently to how he's looked at things his whole life. And so tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, we will hear about what is it exactly that Vidura does to Dhritarashtra that means he's able to get the wisdom through. How was it that Dhritarashtra's whole life had been given this wisdom, but what was different at the end? That when he was given wisdom at the end by Vidura, at that time it penetrated his heart. That is a very interesting question to ask, because the answer to that question may give us some clues ourselves as to how we can prepare ourselves to receive that wisdom and therefore that change of heart. So these were some thoughts I wanted to share with you as we go into this interaction between Vidura and Dhritarashtra, based on Maharaja's point yesterday about how we have to change our way of thinking. We see a contrast here, and we see a movement later on that occurs within Dhritarashtra. And basically that darshan is something which each one of us hold. And we've actually been, by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, equipped with something which can completely change our vision of life. And this actually is the greatest gift, because you can't change the world, but you can change the way you look at the world. And that is the most powerful thing to change. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We end at 8:45, and I'm not going to go over time, so we have 8 minutes. If anyone has any comment, question, or correction, or any kind of reflection, I'm happy to take that. Yes, bro.
I see this mentality of being the victim is just so powerful. It's unbelievable how, and just then you can't hear anymore. Even people come and they tell you, yeah, you have to change to the mentality of gratitude. But they just can't. It's even Vaishnavas, like who hear day after day after day after day, but it's not possible sometimes. So, and I don't, like you talked in the beginning of okay, there's past experiences, yeah, and you bring them practically. You got this mentality from your past experiences. So I'm so, when I see devotees, they suffer so much, are not able to come out of it.
Yeah.
So my question is, okay, you said, okay, we go tomorrow there, the last darshan. So maybe you can give a little preview that we are tomorrow. Preview that we really can be here tomorrow. Like I'm just, it hurts myself so much to see the devotees like this.
I think the first thing is to it's not that we don't undergo suffering. We do undergo suffering. We undergo, some devotees, they undergo such difficulties, such obstacles, and to turn around and say, no, that's not, it is suffering, it's very real suffering. Krishna says, Dukhalayam ashashvatam. But what we have to be careful of is, you see, sometimes the reason we get into victim mentality is we want to justify our inability to change, or inability to improve, or inability to be successful. Sometimes we don't want to put in the effort, or sometimes we don't want to go through that discipline of actually walking that path. And what we then try to do is ascribe our failure to factors outside of our own control, and say, well, what can I do? I've been subjected to this, and therefore it immediately helps us to feel better, because it abdicates us of the responsibility for being successful in our own life. But what the net result of that whole victim mentality is that you completely disempower yourself, and you completely encage yourself in your current situation with no means of moving outside of it. The way we overcome victim mentality is to know that the power of Maya, the power of the material energy, is incredibly strong, but the power of Krishna is even stronger. I often quote this. Many years ago, this is over 20 years ago, we were on Vrindavan Parikrama, and Sacinandana Maharaj, I think at that year, was at Surya Kund, and we came with Radhanath Maharaj and there was a lecture. And then Radhanath Maharaj asked Sacinandana Maharaj, what is your realization over this period? And Maharaj said, my realization is that I'm very fallen, but I'm very, very hopeful. And I always remembered that because I think that is the ideal mindset of a Vaishnava. That we feel, yes, I am very fallen. Yes, I've been subjected to so many things. Yes, I've been under the siege of this material energy in so many ways. But I'm very, very hopeful because I know, like Prabhupada said, don't worry about your astrology. I can kick out thousands of Rahu planets. You know, so we know that the power of the spiritual process, the spiritual wisdom, the spiritual association is so powerful that it can turn everything on its head. And that's how we become aware of our suffering. We don't try to negate that we went through suffering, but we process it in such a way as so that it doesn't limit us. And more in terms of that we'll discuss day after tomorrow. So some thoughts. Yes.
Thank you so much for a beautiful class. Something I'm still thinking on, what really got stuck on me, is when you said that in this world pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I'm really thinking because pain is obviously inevitable. I think every person in this room has felt this. Because you have obviously given a lot of thought to this. What, if you have some reflections on what would be some proactive way of dealing with the pain? How can we use pain in growing? Like if you have any thoughts and reflections, what would be a positive way of using it?
Yes, this is a deep question. I think it begins with darshan here. It's one thing to have pain, accept it as pain, and then try to say, this is painful, this is difficult, now how can I use this to go forward? That's one methodology. But the higher spiritual methodology is to identify something in a different way before you even begin feeling that thing. When you change your vision, you see, one approach is something happens to me, someone insults me, I feel really bad, and then what I do is I try to then, on the back of all of that thinking, I'm feeling bad, this is painful, this is difficult, how can I now use this? That's one way of approaching it. But the higher spiritual methodology is that you change your vision such that when it even comes to you, you don't even register it in that way. It's almost like Radhanath Maharaj said this in the lecture. He said, a Vaishnava has forgiven someone before they've even committed the offense. That's amazing. Haridas Thakur, he had forgiven even before. So it wasn't like Haridas Thakur was in the marketplace and then it was all that pain and now he's like, okay, let's open up the Gita and let's see how to use this in a good way. No, his whole vision had changed. So I think, now that's very lofty, but that's, I think, where we need to go. So we need to go to that point where we need to just start viewing everything. You know, Parikshit said, when the curse came to him, he said, Krishna came to me today in the form of the curse of a Brahmin boy. Not a curse of a Brahmin boy came to me and now I'm going to figure it out how to use it in Krishna consciousness. No, Krishna came to me today in that form. Krishna came to me today in the form of pain. And therefore I don't need to then work it round backwards to figure out how to connect it because it was Krishna. That's a high vision. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Prabhupada translates this, the saints who see with the vision of eternity. I love that. that line, the vision of eternity, who is living with that vision. Until we reach that vision of eternity, through philosophy, through Vaishnava association, through practical thinking, we then sit down, we say, yes, I feel this pain, I feel this suffering, and now how can I frame it in such a way and see it in such a way as to use it in a way that will make me more inspired in Krishna consciousness? How can I refer to devotees of the past who have gone through similar things and see what their reaction was? How can I reflect back in my own life when I've gone through similar experiences like this and so many good things have come out of it? When we become very thoughtful like this, then when we do feel that very real pain and suffering, we can still from the back make some good from it and move forward. But the ultimate thing is we want to get to that point where we don't experience any of that. It's a change of vision. Krishna says, Dukhalaya, I'll end on this point. Krishna says, Dukhalaya mashashvatam. The material world is a place which is full of misery and it's temporary. And what does Prabodhananda Saraswati say? Vishvam Purna Sukhayate. This whole world, everywhere I look in all the 10 directions, I only see happiness. I think like, are you guys part of the same philosophy? Yeah, it is the same philosophy. Because if you try to look at this world as an enjoyer and a controller, know for sure, Dukhalaya mashashvatam. But the moment you look around in this world as a servant of Krishna, seeing it as an object of service, as an opportunity for service, Vishvam Purna Sukhayate, everywhere you just find contentment. I'll just say one last thing. Bhagavatam says in the 5th canto, how does Bhagavatam call the material body? Klesha da. The Sanskrit word for the material body given in the 5th canto is klesha da. Da means to give, klesha means misery. You know what the material body is? That thing which gives you misery. That's literally what the Sanskrit word says. Later on in the 7th canto, Prahlad Maharaj is speaking, and you know what he calls the material body? Arthada. Kaumara achara pragyo dharman bhagavatani ha durlabam manushan janma tad apyadruvam arthadam. Da means to give, artha means great benefit. What is the material body? Is it that which gives great misery, or is it that which gives great benefit? Which one is it? Depends how you use it. If you try to enjoy the body, forget it. Full of misery. If you try to use the body, Bolo Krishna, Bhajo Krishna, Goro Krishna, Shiksha. Great benefit. It's a boat which carries one. So this is change of vision. So this is darshan. Viewing extends beyond the physical act of seeing to comprehension and insight. So, thank you very much. I've gone over time. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Just one moment, dear devotees, I have a short announcement. Despite having a very nice and sweet program yesterday outside of the river, Yamuna River and Govardhan, we had one devotee having a tick afterwards sitting in the grass, so I kindly advise you to observe if you also have a tick, maybe ask some very confidential devotee for the spots where you can't see, they like to go in the groin area. It's a thing you need to take care of because they also carry some diseases, so just watch out for that. Also, if you know devotees who haven't been at the class or have kids, maybe you could also make them aware, of, which were not here, make them aware that we were sitting in the grass there.
This is Zecken in German or what?
Yes, Zecke. Zecke in German it's Zecke.